So let's start walking through the steps to make this Dresden block. I'm going to show you on the diagram just because it's a little easier to point out. There are 3 Dresden blocks on the quilt. Each of them have 2 ribbons that are raw edge applique that we'll put on. We're going to use the same technique for that we used last week to create the horses. You're going to need in the pattern to find a couple of things. You'll need to find the Dresden blade template and the circle template, and you're going to need to find the ribbon templates. One thing to note, these 2 are actual size. This template for the pink ribbons, we couldn't fit it on a whole piece of paper. So you need to cut this piece out and tape it where it says tape to piece 1. So you'll tape to piece 2 here. So you need to tape those 2 pieces together to get a template for a Dresden blade that is long enough for those tails on that prize ribbon block. Another thing, you want to go to the pattern. I think we start on page 16. So each of the Dresden blocks has individual cutting directions, but the construction steps are exactly the same for all of the blocks. So you're only going to need to follow, thought I had all my pieces in order. You only need to follow the directions 1 time, and you're just going to do the same thing 3 times, which is nice because it you get in a little bit of a rhythm that way. You get some practice. Because it kind of fits well under the camera with the tabletop, we are going to make Dresden block number 1. And Dresden block number 1 is 12.5 by 12.5 inches. And you can see, if you're not sure which one is which, you're like, oh, I can't visually place it. If you look at the color print out here, you can see this is Dresden block number 1, this is Dresden block number 2, and this is Dresden block number 3. So that kind of will visually kind of help you as you're working to know which one you're working on. I've done part of the prep for the Dresden block already. The first thing you want to do is, using the directions, you need to cut out using your blades. If you have a Dresden ruler, the easy Dresden ruler, it should be the same size as this. You can use that. But according to the directions, you're going to need to cut out, and you can just see I used this template. That's what I've cut this shape from. You need to cut 10 blades from one fabric and 10 blades from a second fabric. I've sewn part of the block already, so I've only got the 2 blades left, but I want to show you, I want to show you how to finish the whole block. But we're going to start with these 2 blades. So that's where these shapes come from. One thing to note, when you cut these out, these are different fabrics. So this might be a confusing illustration. So you're going to cut one this way. The nice thing is these 2 pieces fit together. So when you cut it, you'll cut one this way with your fabric, and then you'll rotate it and cut it again. And then you don't have to do as much cutting. They line up really nicely as you cut each piece out, so you don't have as much fabric waste. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of these Dresden blades and we're going to fold it in half, right sides facing. And I don't pin because it holds okay without pinning. And you're just going to sew on your machine along this top edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, to save time, I've only sewn 2 of the blades. Let me zoom in a little bit with the camera. Get this out of the way. So I've sewn 2 of the blades, but I wanted to show you, you're going to sew 20 blades all together, and you can use the technique I showed you on the machine where you just fold and place the next one, fold and place the next one. So when you're done with this, you'll actually end up with a string of 20 of these. It just saves so much time to do them all at once. You're going to clip those apart, and then you're going to be very gentle on this next spot. You don't want to pull on this too much. You just want to gently flip that open and press it. Sometimes I'll clip the corner it just depends on the fabric and how big the Dresden blade is. But with this one I've made today, I noticed the point looks crisp without that corner being trimmed. But I'll trim it on the next one just so you know what I'm talking about. So you're going to press that. You're going to try and keep as much as possible, keep this straight across the edge. And then we're going to go to our cutting mat or our pressing mat and just press it. And we'll do the same thing. And so when I talk about trimming the corner, I'm talking about this little corner here on the fold. Sometimes if you feel like that point is not sharp enough, you might have too much bulk in your seam. So just trim this. It also helps, I think, to reduce your stitch length to like a 2.2. My machine usually likes a 2.5, but a slightly shorter stitch length kind of helps keep this from pulling as you work on it too. So I've got that, you can see there, I've got it trimmed and turned. Now I just need to press it. All right, so I have you're gonna keep going till you have a stack of 10 of these and 10 of these, and then we're gonna sew them together. So to sew these together, you're just gonna place them right on top of each other, right sides facing, and line up that side seam. And you're gonna start stitching along this edge from the fold to the raw edge. These two pieces are sewn together, and I like to press at the end, but I'll just show you. You're going to press them apart, and then you're going to keep sewing alternating fabrics all the way around till you get a circle. And I've started one already, so let me show you what I've got started. So you can see of the 20, I have 18 of these sewn. And I realized that I stitched them on the wrong side. So that example, not the best example, but it's okay. We'll just pull these apart. I'll stitch on that other side of the seam really quickly so I can show you how this comes together. All right, I switched that seam. So one thing to keep in mind, so these are just gonna come in here and then we'll have our plate. So one thing to keep in mind, and I can show you on my test, this one's a really good example. Hopefully this will focus. As I was sewing, I noticed, I got my Dresden off and it wasn't laying flat. And as I was sewing, I noticed I was really good with starting my 1/4 inch seam allowance up here. But then as I got towards the center, I think because the piece was angled, I was angling in and I was losing a little bit of seam allowance. This one's actually a really good one to show you. I should have clipped this string off before. Sorry about that. Oh, just gonna have to leave it. But you can see here, see if it'll focus. I have no idea if that's gonna focus there or not. So you can see here where I stitched this completely wrong. Like this comes and it like veers all the way off. So I went through and double checked these inside corners, and I had quite a few. This one's a really extreme example. You can see how I really messed that one up. So I've gone in and double checked. So if yours are not laying flat when you go to finish this circle, you probably don't have a consistent 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across. Just like I said, because this is an angle, I think just like mentally we have like a tendency to kind of change the direction of that seam as we get close to the end of the presser foot. So now all I've got to do is sew this piece in here and then sew this piece here to complete the circle. Now that my circle is completed, hopefully it lays somewhat flat. This one actually looks pretty good. You're going to want to press your seams. Let me move the iron over. I prefer to press all of these seams to one side. It's really up to you if you're more comfortable pressing them open. And it's also kind of nice because I feel like with the iron, you can kind of help get that circle to lay flat too. It's not going to be a perfect circle. Actually, I mean, sure, there's a lot of quilters that can make this just like to the millimeter perfectly spot on. I'm just not one of them. I do my best. So I am pretty happy with that, but hopefully that also gives you some options of troubleshooting if yours is just not coming out the way you want. You definitely need to check that seam allowance because this is geometry. It's a big circle and all those angles and everything need to be precise. So I've got that pressed. I like how that looks. We're gonna move on to the center. So on the pattern, it tells you to trace the circle onto a piece of fabric A, which is your cloud or your white. Just a tip, if you want a fussy cut, which means to like use a specific portion of an image, trace your circle onto the print fabric, not the solid fabric, and then it kind of gives you a little more options as far as design and stuff. So I've got that traced. I've got these two pieces of fabric right sides facing, and then I'm going to sew all the way around this, and I'm going to sew on the line that I drew. That is sewn, and I pressed it to flatten out the seam, and I realized when I pressed it that my disappearing ink line went away, but I've still got the stitching line. Now you're going to trim around the outside of this circle. If you only have little scissors, that's fine. If you have pinking shears, they work great for this because it just helps that circle lay flatter. So I'm just going to use my pinking shears and trim around the edge. But if you don't have pinking shears, don't stress. Just make sure that you're not trimming too close to that stitching line because you don't want it to pop out when you turn it right side out. And I will show you how to turn it right side out, a little trick. All right, so that is trimmed. Get this out of the way. Now, we're going to pinch this apart, and you're just going to cut a slit in the back fabric on the white. Try not to distort the fabric too much because this will show a little bit, and you want to kind of lay it, you want to hide that little piece. So then we're just going to through that corner, or not corner, that opening, just turn this piece right side out. And then what I always like to do is I have a little Hera tool. This one's the Clover 5-point turner. And I will come in here and use this to pop that seam out. So it's nice and flat. You want to get as close to a circle as you can. Working with fabric, it's never going to be perfect. Like I said, it's not paper, it's fabric. You just want a reasonable circle. If you have any bumps that just look really out of place, then you can go and unpick your seam and kind of reset the seam. But this looks pretty good. So I'm going to now press that. All right, now we are ready to start putting this block together. All right, I had to zoom back out a little bit. So we've got our 12.5 by 12.5 inch piece of fabric, and I am going to just, with my fingers, fold it in half twice. So I have a general idea of where the center is. Now this is just going to be visual, what you guys like. You are going to take, and you're going to want to make sure you always keep in mind that you need to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you can't get too close to the edge. But you're just going to place this on. So kind of usually try with these and center up the Dresden, but since they're prize ribbons, I center it this way and then I kind of squish it up a little bit just to give a little more room to the tails, because I mean that's part of the charm of the block is these little tails poking out. And you've definitely got plenty of fabric to put these however you want. You can put them straight up and down like this, which would be more like a traditional prize ribbon. You can angle them out to the side. I think that's how, let me pull out the illustration. So you can see in the illustration, I kind of have them intentionally uneven and off to the side. So I definitely think, unless you're going to try and get it perfect, I think intentionally not straight is good, just because if it's not straight, your eye will pick up on it. But if it is intentionally not straight, your eye will not pick up on it as much. So I've kind of got this visually how I like, and then this will go here. So leaving this Dresden in place, the first thing we need to deal with is we need to deal with these ribbons. So I like where that is. And I made these 2 pieces, as I mentioned before, using the technique we used last week. So I'll peel the paper off the back of that. Put it again where I want it. Let me come in a little bit and up a little bit. And hopefully in the camera this looks straight. It's hard to tell. Usually with this kind of thing, I definitely like to do it standing up versus sitting down. I just think you get a better angle. I am happy with where that is. So I am going to just use my marking pen just so I don't forget, and just kind of mark where the inside of this Dresden sits. I need a new marking pen just so I can line up that circle again. All right, now I'm going to try this is what they want these to look like. I'm going to very carefully move this over to my iron. Luckily that stuff has a little bit of like stickiness just naturally to it, especially humidity in Kentucky, so it stays in place well. And we'll just press this down. For the next step, if you have it, a glue pen is super helpful. You definitely need pins. We're just going to secure this in place. I'm going to come on the back of my Dresden here, use my pen, which, whoo, this pen has seen better days. Let's clean it off a little before we get going. Sorry, I should have done that before I started. But you can see these are well loved. I like to put a little bit of glue on the tip of each blade. All right, now try and get this back where I had marked it. And center line. I feel like that is good. I've got a 1/4 inch on the top, which is one to always keep in mind. And just press it down. Now, before we put the pins in, I like to move it to the iron and use the heat from the iron to set the glue. That's gonna keep from moving a little bit. I come in and I put a pin, several pins in this. You might, if you've never done this before, put a pin in every blade. I'm just gonna do every other blade, because what's gonna happen, you're gonna take this to your sewing machine, you're gonna start sewing it, and it's gonna move, and you just don't want something to move on you and then you're gonna get a pucker because it's not laying flat anymore. So you just wanna improve your chances of keeping this laying as flat as possible as you sew it all the way around. All right. I'm going to leave off the center for now, but it's really easy to do to put it back on. All right, now that I've kind of got this glued down, I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to use that applique stitch. And we're going to do exactly the same thing we did last week and stitch around the edge of the Dresden and stitch around the edge of the Dresden tail here that is exposed. Now that that is sewn, the last thing to do is to also place the center of the Dresden, and you're going to do it the same way. You're just going to use glue and pins and then stitch it down. If you don't want to use a blanket stitch like you did here, if you think that's a little bit too much, you can also just use a straight stitch close to the edge, or if you're somebody that is really good at applique hand sewing, you definitely can hand applique this as well. You're going to make 3 of those. As we mentioned, the technique is all the same. The only thing different is some of the sizes of the pieces. And then you're just going to sew your quilt together. So you guys have all of your elements. We just need to put them together. If you look on page 21 of the pattern, it gives you step-by-step directions of how to do that. Also, if you're a visual person, it's just visually really easy. You're just going to sew the 2 fence blocks together. You're going to sew this row of house blocks together with some sash pieces, and sew the sashing to that. So the large Dresden to that side, so the 3 horses together, that will make your row 1. Row 2 is just a row of your flag blocks. Row 3, you're going to sew 2 horses together, 3 horseshoes together, and then just sew each of those elements to each other. And then, sorry, where did we lose row 4? Wonder if I left it over at my other machine. And then you're just gonna, oh, it's right here. You guys, you can tell I'm at the end of the quilt along. I'm losing it. So it's right where it was supposed to be. Row 4, you've got 2 units of 4 flag blocks sewn together in a row, and then row 5 is just simple blocks sewn to each other, and then sew all of the rows together to complete your quilt top. And there you've got an example of it. I hope you enjoyed this quilt along. Definitely will have more quilt alongs coming this year. If you haven't already, do subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be notified when we have new things come along. And thank you again so much for sewing with me.